Sometimes the hardest thing about losing someone you love isn't the grief. It's learning how to live again. For 72-year-old Gordon Ashfield, widowed and alone, buying an abandoned farm seemed like madness to everyone in town. His own son Derek thought his father had lost his mind. The old Keller property had sat empty for 40 years, nothing but rotting wood and forgotten dreams. But Gordon saw something nobody else could see. As father and son worked together clearing out the barn, something extraordinary happened. Hidden beneath the floorboards lay a secret that had waited decades to be discovered. What Derek found that day would bring them unexpected wealth, but the real treasure was something money couldn't buy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Gordon Ashfield had always been a man of routines. For 37 years, he'd walked the same postal route through Millersfield, delivering letters and packages to neighbors who'd become more like family than customers. He knew who was expecting a birthday card, who waited anxiously for medical results, who ordered books they'd never admit to reading. His hands had placed hope, heartbreak, and everything in between into countless mailboxes, always with the same careful attention. Retirement 3 years ago had left him adrift. Then Ruth died 6 months later, and the world he'd built so carefully simply stopped making sense. The house they'd shared for 43 years felt too large, too quiet, filled with her absence in ways that made breathing difficult some mornings. Her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. Her coffee mug remained in the cabinet, the one with the faded flowers she'd bought at that craft fair in 1989. He couldn't bring himself to move these things, but seeing them every day was like touching a fresh bruise. People told him it would get easier. They were wrong. It just became familiar. On a Tuesday morning in late September, Gordon drove past the old Keller farm on his way to the hardware store. He'd driven this road 1,000 times, but that morning, something made him slow down. The for sale sign had been there so long it had weathered to near illegibility, leaning at an angle that suggested the wind had given up trying to knock it over completely. He pulled onto the gravel drive without really deciding to. The farmhouse sagged like an old man too tired to stand straight anymore. Windows were broken, porch boards rotted through, paint peeled in long strips that hung like dead skin. The barn behind it wasn't much better. Roof bowed in the middle, walls listing to one side, doors hanging from rusted hinges. But Gordon remembered this place differently. He'd been 12 years old when his grandfather brought him here. Samuel Keller had been alive then, a quiet man with hands scarred from forge work and eyes that seemed to look right through you. Grandfather had commissioned a set of fireplace tools, and young Gordon had watched, mesmerized, as Samuel shaped hot metal into elegant curves and precise angles. The workshop had glowed with orange light, rang with the rhythm of hammer on anvil, smelled of coal smoke and hot iron. Quality takes time, Samuel had told him that day, holding up a poker still cooling. Most people won't pay for it anymore, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth doing right. Gordon had never forgotten those words, though he'd lost track of how often he'd failed to live by them. Standing in the overgrown yard 60 years later, Gordon felt something shift inside his chest. Not quite hope, not quite purpose, but something close to both. Ruth had always encouraged him to pursue dreams he'd set aside. Later had been his favorite word. Later when they had more money, later when he had more time, later when the moment was right. Later never came. He called the real estate agent that afternoon. The farm was listed at $48,000, which might as well have been $400,000 given his postal pension. But he had Ruth's life insurance, sitting untouched in an account he couldn't bear to spend. Using it for something she would have loved, a project, a purpose, a place to build something new from something old, felt right in a way nothing else had since she died. The agent seemed surprised anyone was interested. The property had been on the market for 11 years. Gordon made an offer, $35,000 cash as is. They accepted within 24 hours. When he called Derek to share the news, the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, Gordon checked to see if the call had dropped. "Dad," Derek finally said, his voice carefully controlled in that way he'd perfected in corporate meetings. "You bought a what?" "A farm, well, mostly land. The buildings need work. You don't farm. You've never farmed. Your grandmother grew tomatoes," Gordon offered. "In pots on the patio. That's not farming, that's gardening." Derek exhaled slowly. "Dad, are you okay? I mean, really okay?" Gordon understood the subtext. "Are you losing it? Is this grief talking? Should I be worried?" "I'm fine, Derek. I just want a project. Something to work on. You're 72 years old. I'm aware." Another pause. "Where is this place?" "About 15 minutes outside town. The old Keller property, off Route 47. That falling down wreck?" Derek's voice rose slightly. "Dad, that place should be condemned, not purchased. It has good bones. It has no bones. It's held together by rust and wishful thinking." Gordon smiled despite himself. "Come see it this weekend. I'll make lunch. I have a presentation Monday morning. I should prepare." "Derek," Gordon kept his voice gentle. "Please." The word hung between them, weighted with all the times Gordon hadn't asked, hadn't reached out, hadn't prioritized his son over work or routine, or the comfortable distance that had grown between them over decades. "I'll be there Saturday," Derek said quietly. "But I'm bringing a structural engineer's perspective, and you're not going to like what I tell you." Gordon smiled. "Fair enough." Saturday arrived with October's first real chill, leaves just beginning their transformation from green to gold. Gordon had spent the week clearing brush around the barn, revealing the building's full state of disrepair. He'd also begun exploring the interior, carefully testing floorboards before trusting his weight to them. That's when he found the journal. It was wedged between rafters in the barn's loft, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly preserved the leather binding. The pages were brittle, yellowed, covered in careful handwriting that slanted slightly to the right. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1932. "Today marks the beginning of my specialized work. RH has approached me with unusual request. Discretion required. Payment generous. I accept not for money alone, but for the challenge. What I create must last beyond my years, must protect what cannot be protected through ordinary means." Gordon sat in the dusty loft, reading by the light of his phone's flashlight. Entry after entry detailed Samuel Keller's work, not just horseshoes and farm equipment, but specialized projects for unnamed clients. The writing was cryptic, full of references to securing what matters and foundations that endure. He was still reading when Derek's car pulled up the driveway. Derek emerged, wearing weekend casual that probably cost more than Gordon spent on clothes in a year. Designer jeans, expensive hiking boots that had never seen a trail, a jacket with subtle branding Gordon didn't recognize. At 45, Derek had his mother's dark hair graying at the temples, Gordon's lean build, and the perpetually distracted expression of someone whose mind was always 3 meetings ahead. They embraced briefly, awkwardly. "So," Derek said, surveying the property, "it's worse than I remembered. It's got potential. It's got structural failure. Dad, seriously, this barn could collapse in the next strong wind. Then we should probably start working on it." Derek turned to look at him. "We? I was hoping you might help. Weekends, when you have time." Something flickered across Derek's face. Surprise, maybe, or guilt, or both. "I don't know anything about construction." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." They stood in silence, fallen leaves skittering across the yard between them. Finally, Derek nodded. "Show me what you found." Gordon led him to the barn, pointing out the areas he'd already assessed. Derek moved through the space, with the same analytical approach he brought to everything, making notes on his phone, asking questions about foundation and load-bearing walls. Then Gordon showed him the journal. Derek read the first few pages, frowning. "This is from the 1930s? Samuel Keller owned this property, blacksmith. He disappeared in 1941. And he was doing what exactly? This is pretty vague." "That's what makes it interesting." Derek looked up from the journal, studying his father's face. "You think there's something here, don't you? Some kind of mystery to solve. I think there's a story worth understanding." They spent the rest of the afternoon working side by side, clearing debris from the barn's interior. Conversation came in fits and starts, punctuated by long silences that weren't quite comfortable, but weren't hostile either. Derek talked about work, about the clients driving him crazy, about projects that never seemed to end. Gordon listened, aware of how little he really knew about his son's daily life. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the property, Derek paused in the barn's doorway. "Dad, why did you really buy this place?" Gordon considered the question, the journal heavy in his jacket pocket. "Because I needed something to care about again. And because I remember being here as a boy, watching a craftsman create something meant to last. I want to understand what he built, what mattered enough to document so carefully. Maybe," he stopped, then continued, "maybe I want to build something that lasts too." Derek nodded slowly. "I'll come back next weekend. Bring some tools." "Thank you." After Derek left, Gordon climbed back into the loft and continued reading by lantern light. Deep into the journal, one entry caught his attention. "The key to everything lies in what we choose to preserve. Not all treasures shine. Not all value is visible. I have built something that will outlast me, that will protect what others entrusted to my care. When I am gone, may the right person find what I have hidden. May they understand why." Gordon closed the journal, his heart beating faster. Something was hidden here. Something Samuel Keller had deemed worth protecting for posterity. He just had to find it. 3 weeks into the project, Gordon and Derek had established a rhythm. Derek arrived every Saturday morning around 9. They worked until mid-afternoon, then shared a late lunch before Derek drove back to the city. The routine felt fragile, like something that might shatter if either of them examined it too closely. They'd made progress on the barn, clearing debris, shoring up dangerous sections, assessing what could be saved versus what needed replacing. Derek approached it like a corporate project, creating spreadsheets and timelines. Gordon worked more intuitively, letting the building tell him what it needed. The tension between these approaches created friction, neither acknowledged directly. "We should hire contractors," Derek said one Saturday, examining a support beam that had rotted through at the base. "This is beyond what 2 people can handle safely. It's expensive. So is a collapsed barn, or a funeral after said barn falls on someone." Gordon set down his hammer. "I'm being careful. You're being stubborn." Derek's voice carried an edge Gordon recognized from childhood arguments. "You've always been like this. Doing everything yourself, never asking for help, acting like needing other people is some kind of weakness." The accusation hung in the dusty air between them. "That's not fair," Gordon said quietly. "Isn't it?" Derek's frustration broke through his usual corporate composure. "Do you know how many times Mom asked you to take a vacation? To cut back hours? To just be present instead of constantly working? I was providing for my family. You were hiding." The words came out harder than Derek seemed to intend. He rubbed his face.
"I'm sorry."
"I didn't mean... Maybe you did." Gordon picked up the hammer again, not because he needed it, but because his hands required something to hold. "Maybe you're right." They worked in silence after that, the only sounds hammer strikes and the wind through broken boards. By noon, they'd cleared enough of the barn floor to assess the foundation. Many of the planks were rotted beyond saving, which meant pulling them up to examine the structure beneath. Derek approached it systematically, marking each board, photographing the layout before disturbing anything. Gordon appreciated his son's thoroughness, even if it slowed the work. They were prying up a section near the barn's center when Derek's crowbar struck something metallic. The sound rang clear and sharp, distinctly different from nails or hinges. "There's something here," Derek said, working the crowbar more carefully. Gordon knelt beside him, pulling aside splintered wood. Wedged between floor joists, wrapped partially in deteriorated cloth, lay an iron key. Not a modern key. This was hand-forged, roughly 5 inches long, with an ornate bow featuring scrollwork that seemed to flow like water frozen in metal. Derek lifted it carefully. Despite decades in the barn, the key showed minimal rust. The craftsmanship was exceptional, every detail precise and intentional. "Samuel Keller made this," Gordon said with certainty. "How do you know?" Gordon retrieved the journal from his truck, flipping to pages he'd marked. "Here. He describes his technique, The scrollwork pattern, the way he treated iron to prevent corrosion. This matches exactly. Derek turned the key in his hands, examining it from every angle. What does it open? They spent the next 2 hours searching the barn. Every door, every cabinet, every locked box or trunk they could find. Nothing matched. The key was unique, elaborate, clearly important, and completely useless without knowing what it unlocked. Maybe whatever it opened is long gone, Derek suggested. Sold or destroyed decades ago. Gordon returned to the journal, reading more carefully now. One entry, dated June 1935, caught his attention. Today, I completed the mechanism for RH. The key will open what I have built, but only for those who understand where to look. The foundation of what I built is not where men expect to find foundations. What is secured must remain secured until the proper time. Not where men expect to find foundations, Gordon read aloud. What does that mean? Could be metaphorical. Poets love that kind of language. Samuel was a blacksmith, not a poet. Derek sat back on his heels. So he's saying there's a foundation somewhere unexpected. What are the options? The barn foundation? The house? Or something else entirely? Gordon looked around the barn with fresh eyes. Something he built that we don't know about yet. Dad, Derek's voice carried a note of caution. We don't even know if this means anything. This could be a key to a neighbor's house from 80 years ago. You saw the craftsmanship. That's not a house key. Fine, but even if Samuel built something elaborate, that doesn't mean it still exists. This property has been abandoned for decades. Anyone could have found whatever this opens and taken it. Gordon recognized the familiar pattern, Derek's practicality against his own intuition. It had defined their relationship for years. Derek lived in spreadsheets and logical outcomes. Gordon trusted his gut, followed hunches, believed in things that couldn't be quantified. It was why Derek succeeded in business, while Gordon had remained a postal carrier his entire career. And maybe why Derek's marriage had failed, while Gordon and Ruth had lasted 43 years. Let's keep looking, Gordon said. 1 more hour. Derek checked his phone, a gesture Gordon had seen 100 times, Derek's tell when he was anxious about work obligations. I have calls scheduled for tomorrow morning. I should review materials tonight. 1 hour. Derek met his eyes, and something in Gordon's expression must have resonated. 1 hour. Then I really need to go. They continued searching, this time moving beyond the barn to the property itself. The old well, the collapsed chicken coop, the remains of what might have been a smokehouse. Nothing suggested a lock that would fit their elaborate key. As the hours stretched toward 90 minutes, Derek's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, silenced it. 2 minutes later it rang again. You should take that, Gordon said. It can wait. Derek, I said it can wait. There was an edge in Derek's voice, frustration that wasn't really about the phone call. They worked in tense silence until Derek's phone rang a 3rd time. He answered it, walking away from the barn, his voice shifting into the professional tone he used for work. Gordon watched his son pace near the driveway, gesturing with his free hand, clearly managing some crisis. When Derek returned, his expression was strained. I need to go. There's a situation with the Markson account. They're threatening to pull out if we don't have a revised proposal by Monday morning. It's Saturday afternoon, which gives me the rest of today and tomorrow to fix it. Derek pocketed his phone.
I'm sorry.
I know I said I'd stay. Gordon nodded, disappointment settling heavy in his chest but trying not to show it. Work is important. So is this. Derek gestured at the barn, the key still in his other hand. I don't want you to think I don't care about what we're doing here. I know, but Derek must have heard something in those 2 words, some doubt Gordon couldn't quite conceal. Do you? Because I get the feeling you think I'm just humoring you, that I show up out of obligation. I think you have a life, a career, responsibilities. That's not an answer. Gordon chose his words carefully. I think you're very good at being busy, just like I was, and I think maybe you inherited that from me, which makes me sad. Derek's jaw tightened. I'm not hiding from anything. I didn't say you were, but you're thinking it. Derek ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so like Ruth it made Gordon's chest ache. "You know what? I don't have time for this. Here." He held out the key. Gordon didn't take it. "Keep it. Look at it this week. Maybe you'll notice something I missed." For a moment, Derek seemed ready to argue. Then he pocketed the key and headed for his car. He paused with his hand on the door handle. "I'll be back next weekend," he said. "Only if you can. I'll be back." Derek said it firmly, like a promise he was making to both of them. After Derek left, Gordon returned to the barn and continued working as daylight faded. He found himself thinking about what Derek had said earlier, about Gordon never asking for help, about hiding behind work. Ruth had said similar things over the years, gently, lovingly, but with an underlying truth Gordon had never fully acknowledged. That evening, alone in his trailer park beside the farmhouse, Gordon reread Samuel's journal by lamplight. One passage near the end struck him differently now. "I have built my life's work in isolation, trusting no one with the full truth." This was necessary, but also sad. A man who shares nothing shares no real life at all. "I hope whoever finds what I have hidden understands. The treasure is not in what you discover, but in whom you trust enough to share the discovery with." Gordon closed the journal and looked at the key Derek had left behind on the small table. His son had kept it after all. Gordon spent the following week working alone on the farm, his hands busy, while his mind circled around Derek's words. The accusation about hiding hadn't been wrong exactly, just uncomfortable in its accuracy. By Thursday, he'd admitted to himself that he needed help, real help, not just weekend assistance from a son who had his own life. The barn required expertise Gordon didn't possess, and stubbornness wouldn't keep the structure standing through winter. Stuart Gaines arrived Friday morning in a pickup truck that had seen better decades. Stuart was maybe 65, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life working outdoors, and the quiet competence of a man who'd forgotten more about construction than Gordon would ever know. "Heard you bought the Keller place," Stuart said, shaking Gordon's hand. "Brave or crazy? Haven't decided which yet." "Probably both." They walked the property together, Stuart taking mental notes as Gordon explained what he hoped to accomplish. In the barn, Stuart ran his hands along beams, tested joints, knocked on supports to hear how they sounded. "It's not as bad as it looks," Stuart said finally. "Which is good because it looks terrible." Gordon laughed despite himself. "Can it be saved?" "Can be. Whether it should be is a different question." Stuart pulled out a small notebook, sketching quick diagrams. "You're looking at serious money for materials. Labor I can do reasonable, but we're talking months of work. I've got time." "Fair enough." Stuart noticed the journal sitting on Gordon's makeshift work table. "That's Samuel Keller's?" "You knew him?" "Not personally, before my time, but my uncle worked with him some. Said Samuel was the finest metal worker he'd ever seen. Also said he was strange." "Strange how?" Stuart shrugged. "Secretive. Particular about his clients. Toward the end, people said he was working on something big, but nobody knew what. Then he just disappeared one day. 1941, I think. They found his workshop locked up tight, but no sign of Samuel himself." Gordon felt his pulse quicken. "What happened to his workshop?" "You're standing in it. This barn was his forge. The house was just where he slept." Stuart walked to the far wall, tapping on boards. "Uncle said Samuel built a proper smithy setup back here. Coal forge, anvils, specialized tools. All gone now, of course. Probably sold off or scrapped decades ago." "Did your uncle ever mention Samuel building anything unusual? Hidden storage, maybe?" Stuart's eyes sharpened with interest. "Why, you find something?" Gordon showed him the key. Stuart whistled low, turning the key in his calloused hands. "That's beautiful work." "Samuel's for sure. I'd recognize that scrollwork anywhere. My uncle had one of his pieces, a fireplace poker. Same pattern." He examined the key more closely. "This isn't for opening doors, though. See how the bit is configured? This is for a specialized lock. Probably a safe or strongbox. We searched the barn. Nothing matches. Well, Samuel was known for making custom security pieces. During the Depression, folks didn't trust banks. Some of the wealthy families around here hired Samuel to create hidden safes, concealed compartments, that sort of thing. If this key belongs to one of those..." Stewart handed it back. Could be valuable, or could open something long gone. They spent the morning working on the barn's foundation, Stewart teaching Gordon how to properly shore up compromised sections. Around noon, Stewart suggested checking the root cellar. Gordon hadn't even known there was one. They found the entrance behind the farmhouse, hidden under years of overgrown vegetation. Stone steps led down to a wooden door that hung askew on rusted hinges. Stewart forced it open, and they descended into musty darkness. The cellar was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with stone walls and a dirt floor. Empty shelves lined one wall, rotted boards that had once held preserves or stored vegetables. Nothing else, just old mason jars and the smell of damp earth. "Not much here," Stewart said, playing his flashlight across the walls. But Gordon noticed something. The stones in the far wall didn't quite match the others, slightly different color, mortar less weathered. He ran his hand across them, feeling the texture. "This section was rebuilt," he said. Stewart examined it more closely. "You're right. See how these stones are fitted. Different technique than the rest. Someone patched this, maybe 20 or 30 years after the original construction. Samuel?" "Could be." Stewart worked his fingers into the mortar joints, testing. One stone shifted slightly. He wiggled it carefully until it came free, revealing a hollow space behind. Inside was a photograph, protected in a wax paper wrapping that had mostly preserved it. The image showed a man in his 40s, lean and serious, standing beside an elaborate metal gate. The scrollwork on the gate matched the pattern on their key exactly. Behind the man, partially visible through the gate, was an interior space with workbenches and equipment Gordon didn't recognize. "That's Samuel," Stewart said. "And that gate, I've never seen anything like it." Gordon turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faded pencil, "Commission completed, May 1935, the finest work of my hands." He was proud of this, Gordon said quietly. Whatever he built, it mattered to him. They climbed back out of the cellar, the photograph carefully protected in Gordon's jacket pocket. Stewart had to leave for another job, but promised to return Monday to continue work on the barn. Derek arrived Saturday morning earlier than usual, looking tired but determined. He'd brought coffee and breakfast sandwiches, which Gordon accepted gratefully. "Rough week?" Gordon asked. "Saved the Markson account. Lost 2 nights of sleep doing it." Derek sipped his coffee. "Totally worth it, I'm sure. In the grand scheme of things, a client's quarterly projections are obviously more important than, say, having a life." The bitterness in his voice surprised Gordon. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Just tired." Derek set down his coffee. "Did you find anything this week?" Gordon showed him the photograph. Derek studied it carefully, his analytical mind engaging. "This gate, it's the same design as the key." So Samuel definitely made both. "And look at the background. That's not a regular workshop. Those look like specialized tools, maybe for precision work." Stewart said Samuel made custom security pieces for wealthy families. "During the Depression?" "Exactly during the Depression. People didn't trust banks after they failed. Some hired craftsmen to create hidden storage." Derek's expression shifted as he processed this. "So Samuel might have been building what, safes, vaults?" "Something like that. And if our key opens one of them—" Derek didn't finish the thought, but Gordon heard it anyway. "If their key opened one of Samuel's creations, there might be something inside worth finding." They returned to the barn with renewed purpose. Derek had brought a proper metal detector, borrowed from a colleague who used it for weekend treasure hunting. They spent the morning methodically covering the barn's interior, listening for any signal that might indicate metal beneath the floorboards or in the walls. Around 2 in the afternoon, the detector screamed near the barn's southeastern corner. They marked the spot and began carefully removing floorboards. 2 feet down, buried in hard-packed earth, they found a metal box. It took 20 minutes to excavate it carefully. The box was roughly 18 inches square, made of iron with copper inlay, creating the same flowing scrollwork pattern. Despite decades underground, it had survived remarkably well, testament to Samuel's skill with protective finishes. The lock was elaborate, clearly custom-made. Gordon's hand trembled slightly as he inserted their key. It fit perfectly. The mechanism turned smoothly, well engineered, even after 80 years. The lock clicked open. Derek and Gordon exchanged glances, both holding their breath before Gordon lifted the lid. The box was empty. Not just empty, pried open from the inside at some point, the interior latch broken, scratches on the metal suggesting someone had forced it with a tool. Derek sat back on his heels. "Someone beat us to it." Gordon examined the box more carefully. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, every joint precise, every decorative element thoughtfully placed. Even empty, it was beautiful. "This box alone might be worth something," he said. "Great! We found an expensive empty box." Derek's frustration was evident. "Dad, I think we need to accept that whatever Samuel hid, it's gone. Someone found it decades ago." But Gordon was studying the broken latch, the scratches on the interior. "These marks are old but not ancient. Maybe 30 years, not 80. So someone found it in the 70s or 80s instead of the 40s. Still means it's gone." Stuart arrived then, curious about their discovery. He examined the box with the appreciation of someone who understood fine craftsmanship. "That's worth 3, maybe 5,000 to the right collector," he said. "Samuel's work is rare. Most of it was destroyed or lost." "See," Gordon said to Derek, "not nothing. It's not what we were hoping for, though." Derek stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. "I think we should contact an antique appraiser. See what this box is actually worth. At minimum, it'll help cover some of your investment in this place. I want to keep looking first." "For what?" "Dad, be realistic. Samuel made multiple pieces." Stuart said so. "This might not be the only thing he hid." Derek pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture Gordon recognized as his son fighting back frustration. "I have vacation days saved. 2 weeks' worth. I haven't taken time off in 3 years." Gordon waited, not sure where this was going. "I could take them now," Derek continued. "Stay here, help you search properly, but I need you to promise that after 2 weeks, we're done chasing ghosts. We document what we found, get it appraised, and you focus on actually restoring this farm instead of treasure hunting." "Do 2 weeks? That's all I can give you." Gordon looked at his son, really looked at him. Derek appeared exhausted, wound tight with stress Gordon recognized because he'd carried the same tension for decades. Taking 2 weeks off was probably terrifying for him, an admission that work wasn't everything. "Deal," Gordon said. "Thank you." They shook hands, formal and slightly awkward, but it felt like something important had shifted between them. Stuart clapped Derek on the shoulder. "Good man. Now let's get this box properly cleaned up and documented. Then tomorrow we search like professionals." As they worked into the evening, cleaning decades of dirt from the box's intricate metalwork, Gordon caught Derek examining the photograph again, running his finger along Samuel's gate with its elaborate scrollwork. "What are you thinking?" Gordon asked. "That someone who makes something this beautiful doesn't just make one?" Gordon smiled. Maybe there was more of him in his son than either of them had realized. Derek's first full week at the farm began with methodical planning. He created spreadsheets documenting every inch of the property, assigned grid references, tracked what they'd already searched. Gordon watched his son transform the project into something organized and systematic, recognizing both the value and the limits of such an approach. Some things couldn't be reduced to data points. On Tuesday, while clearing debris from beneath the barn's old workbench, Gordon found a tin box wedged between support beams. The metal had rusted through in places, but inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was another ledger. This one was different from the journal. Purely business records, dated entries from 1933 to 1937, listed Samuel's regular work: horseshoes at $2 per set, repair jobs, custom tools for local farmers. The handwriting was precise, amounts carefully tallied, a record of a craftsman's modest but steady income. But near the back, separated by a blank page, was a section titled Private Commissions. The entries here used only initials instead of full names: R.H., J.W., M.B., and others. Each listed a date, a brief description that was deliberately vague. Security, installation, specialized storage, custom vault work, and payment amounts that made Gordon's breath catch. The largest entry read, RH Complete Security Installation, $2,400, June 1935. That's nearly $50,000 in today's money, Derek said, looking over Gordon's shoulder. For one job. They sat at the small table in Gordon's trailer, the ledger between them, trying to understand what they'd found. People were desperate during the Depression, Gordon said. Banks failed. People lost everything. If you had wealth, you hid it. So these wealthy families hired Samuel to build, what exactly? Hidden safes in their homes. Maybe. Or maybe something else. Gordon flipped through the pages again. All these private commissions are concentrated in 1933 through 1937, the worst years of the Depression. Then they stop because the economy improved, or because Samuel finished whatever project he was working on. The next morning, they drove into town to the Millersfield Public Library. Francine Holbrook, the head librarian, was in her late 60s, with steel-grey hair and the sharp intelligence of someone who'd spent her life helping others find information they didn't know they needed. "Gordon Ashfield," she said warmly. "I heard you bought the old Keller place. Bold move. Reckless, according to most people. Same thing, really." She smiled at Derek. "And you must be his son. I can see the resemblance." Derek shook her hand, charm automatic. "Derek Ashfield, we're hoping you might help us with some historical research." Francine led them to a back room where local records were stored. Old newspapers, town documents, family histories donated over the years. She pulled out materials from the 1930s without being asked, clearly anticipating their needs. "Looking into Samuel Keller," she asked. "How did you know?" "Small town. Word gets around when someone finds interesting things in old barns." She set a stack of folders on the table. "Samuel's one of our mysteries. Came here in 1920, stayed 21 years, then vanished. No family, no close friends that anyone remembers, just his work." Gordon showed her the ledger entry for RH. "Any idea who this might be?" Francine studied it, then pulled out a folder. "Randolph Hargrove. Railroad family, old money. Had an estate about 15 miles from here." She showed them a photograph from 1930, a grand house, 3 stories, surrounded by manicured grounds. "What happened to the estate?" Derek asked. "Abandoned during World War II. The family moved west, and the house fell into disrepair. It was demolished in 1962. She pulled out more documents. "But here's what's interesting. There were rumors the Hargroves lost most of their wealth during the Depression. Randolph's father had invested heavily just before the crash. So they would have been desperate to protect whatever they had left," Gordon said. "Exactly. And if they hired Samuel Keller to create secure storage." Francine left the thought unfinished, but the implication was clear. They spent hours going through records, identifying possible matches for the other initials in Samuel's ledger. By late afternoon, they'd found 5 families who'd had significant wealth in the early 1930s and lived near Millersfield. All 5 estates were gone now, demolished or burned or simply collapsed with time. So, if Samuel built security installations at their homes, Derek said, everything would have been destroyed or looted decades ago. But Gordon was thinking about something else. What if he didn't build them at the estates? What if the families stored their valuables somewhere else? Somewhere Samuel controlled, like his farm, Derek said slowly. His barn was a forge. He had the space, the privacy, the expertise. What if he offered not just to build secure storage, but to be the storage? Francine looked up from the documents she'd been organizing. That would explain why he was so secretive. He wouldn't just be protecting his own property, he'd be protecting everyone's. They thanked Francine and drove back to the farm in thoughtful silence. Gordon could see Derek processing, analyzing, weighing probabilities the way he approached business problems. "It's a good theory," Derek said finally, "but it's still just a theory. We have no proof Samuel actually stored anything on his property. The box we found was empty. Maybe Samuel built it as a sample to show clients. Maybe it held something once but was found years ago. We don't know." Gordon pulled into the farm's driveway, parking near the barn. "You don't believe we'll find anything?" Derek was quiet for a moment. I want to believe it, I do. But Dad, I've spent my career dealing with reality, not possibility. And the reality is, we've found some beautiful craftsmanship and interesting history, but no actual treasure. The week isn't over. No, Derek agreed. It's not. That evening, Gordon called Derek to the barn. He'd been rereading Samuel's journal and found an entry he'd overlooked before. Listen to this, Gordon said. July 1936. The work progresses slowly but surely. R.H. visited today, anxious about security. I assured him, what's buried isn't always beneath. The greatest works are those built to last beyond sight. What's buried isn't always beneath, Derek repeated. What does that mean? I think it means we've been looking in the wrong places. We've been checking the ground, the foundation, looking down. But Samuel says it's not beneath, so it's hidden in plain sight. In the walls, maybe? They spent the next 2 hours tapping on walls, checking for hollow spaces, examining every surface of the barn. Nothing seemed unusual. As night fell, Derek sat on an overturned bucket, frustrated. We're missing something obvious. Gordon joined him, both men staring at the barn's interior as if it might suddenly reveal its secrets. Tell me about your divorce, Gordon said quietly. The question clearly surprised Derek. Why? Because you haven't mentioned it once since you've been here, and because I never asked about it when it happened. I should have. Derek was silent for a long moment. We grew apart. The usual story. I worked too much. She wanted more attention. We stopped talking about anything that mattered. Eventually, we were just two people living in the same house. I'm sorry. You warned me, actually. When I got engaged, you said something about making sure I didn't repeat your mistakes. I didn't understand what you meant then. And now I understand that being present is harder than it looks. You can be in the same room as someone and still be completely absent. Derek picked up a piece of wood, turned it in his hands. I kept telling myself I was building a future, but I was really just avoiding the present. Gordon recognized the pattern because he'd lived it. Your mother tried to tell me that for years. I didn't listen until it was too late. At least you had 43 years together. I managed barely 6. They sat in comfortable silence, darkness deepening around them. Gordon thought about Ruth, about all the evenings he'd stayed late at work rather than coming home, about the trips they'd planned for later, and the conversations they'd postponed until there was time. Later never came. There was never time. I'm glad you're here, Gordon said. These 2 weeks, it means more than you know. Derek nodded, clearly moved but unsure how to respond. I'm glad I came, even if we don't find anything else. The next morning, Derek was up before Gordon, already in the barn when Gordon arrived with coffee. He was standing in the center of the space, slowly turning in a circle, examining everything from a different perspective. What are you doing? Gordon asked. Thinking about Samuel, about someone who builds elaborate security systems. Where would I hide something if I wanted it to last beyond sight, but not be beneath? Gordon waited, watching his son work through the problem. Above, Derek said finally. Not buried below. Hidden above. They both looked up at the barn's loft, the rafters, the peak of the roof. And there, carved into the main support beam 20 feet above the ground, barely visible in the shadows, was a symbol. The same scrollwork pattern from the key. Getting to the carved symbol required a tall ladder Stuart borrowed from a neighbor. Derek climbed up first, running his fingers over the scrollwork etched into the beam. The carving was shallow but deliberate, clearly Samuel's mark. There's something else, Derek called down. The wood here feels different, less weathered than the surrounding beam. Stuart joined him on the ladder, examining the area closely. This section was added later. See the joinery? It's a patch, fitted so well you'd never notice unless you were looking. They spent the next hour carefully removing the patched section. Behind it, carved into the original beam, was text, 20 paces south, 10 west. The carpenter's tool reveals the truth. Gordon copied the instructions carefully into a notebook. 20 paces from what? From here, probably, Stuart said. From this beam. They measured 20 paces south from the beam's position, which led them outside the barn toward the old well. Then 10 paces west, which put them in an overgrown area they'd barely explored. "What's a carpenter's tool?" Derek asked. Stewart shrugged. "Could be anything. Saw, hammer, level—" "The carpenter's square," Gordon interrupted. "The one with the hidden map." They retrieved it from the trailer, where they'd stored it carefully. Derek opened the hidden compartment, and they examined the rolled paper again. This time, Gordon noticed something he'd missed before: faint marks at the paper's edge, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. Coordinates, written in tiny, precise numbers. "He encoded it twice," Derek said with grudging admiration. "The map shows the general area, but the exact location is in coordinates only visible if you find the message in the beam." Using the coordinates and their measurements, they pinpointed a spot roughly 8 feet in diameter. The ground appeared undisturbed, covered in decades of leaf litter and wild grass. Stewart went to his truck and returned with ground-penetrating radar equipment borrowed from a contractor friend. "Let's see what's down there before we start digging blind." The radar took 15 minutes to set up and calibrate. Stewart moved it slowly over the marked area, watching the screen intently. Gordon and Derek stood nearby, tension building with each pass. "There," Stewart said finally, 8 feet down. "Looks like a void space, maybe 10 by 12 feet. And see these readings? That's concrete or stone. Something structural." "A room," Gordon breathed. "An underground room," Derek corrected. "Built intentionally, probably reinforced. This isn't just a hole in the ground. Someone engineered this." They looked at each other, the implications sinking in. Samuel hadn't just hidden a box. He'd built something substantial, something meant to last. "We need proper excavation equipment," Stewart said. "This isn't something we can dig by hand safely. The ground could be unstable, especially after decades." Derek pulled out his phone, already researching. "There's an excavation company in the next county. They rent equipment. It'll be expensive," Stewart warned. "I'll cover it," Derek said. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right." Gordon studied his son, seeing something different in him now. The week away from work had changed Derek somehow. He seemed more present, less distracted. The constant phone checking had diminished. His shoulders had lost some of their permanent tension. "You okay with this?" Gordon asked. "The expense?" Derek smiled. "Dad, I've spent more on client dinners I didn't enjoy. If we're going to dig up Samuel Keller's secret, I want to do it properly." The excavation company arrived 2 days later with a small backhoe and shoring equipment. The operator, a weathered man named Dale, listened to their explanation with the patient expression of someone who'd heard plenty of unusual requests. "Underground room from the 1930s, he said. "That'll be interesting." Most people from that era didn't have the engineering knowledge for something stable. "Samuel Keller wasn't most people," Stewart said. Dale nodded. "We'll be careful. Last thing we need is a collapse." They began digging methodically, Dale operating the backhoe with precision while Stewart supervised. Gordon and Derek watched from a safe distance, anticipation building with every scoop of earth removed. 6 feet down, the bucket struck concrete. Dale shut off the equipment and climbed down to examine it. "Well, I'll be damned. This is proper reinforced concrete. Whoever built this knew what they were doing." They cleared dirt by hand after that, revealing a concrete stairway leading downward. The craftsmanship was remarkable, each step perfectly formed, the walls smooth and professionally finished. At the bottom of the stairs was a door, not wood, but metal, heavy steel with an elaborate locking mechanism that made the lockbox they'd found look simple by comparison. The surface was covered in the same flowing scrollwork pattern, raised metalwork, that caught the afternoon light filtering down from above. Gordon descended the stairs slowly, his heart pounding. Derek followed, both of them standing in the narrow space before the door. The lock required their key. Gordon's hand trembled slightly as he inserted it. The mechanism was complex, requiring the key to turn in 3 different positions before anything clicked. When it finally did, the sound was solid and precise, metal meeting metal with the certainty of perfect engineering. The door swung open smoothly, hinges silent despite 80 years sealed underground. Beyond was darkness. Stuart passed down a lantern, and Gordon held it high, illuminating the space within. The room was roughly 12 by 10 feet, concrete walls and ceiling, surprisingly dry. Wooden shelving lined 3 walls, and on those shelves sat wooden crates, metal boxes, and carefully wrapped bundles. Everything was covered in dust, but appeared remarkably preserved. Derek stepped inside first, moving carefully, as if afraid the room might disappear if he disturbed it. He approached the nearest crate, brushing away decades of dust to reveal words stenciled on the side. R.H., 1935. Randolph Hargrove, Gordon whispered. They opened the crate carefully. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had mostly survived, were silver serving pieces, platters, candlesticks, tea service. Each piece was tarnished but intact, bearing hallmarks and engravings that spoke of quality and age. The second crate contained coins, not just a few, hundreds of them carefully organized in wooden dividers. Silver dollars, gold pieces, some dating back to the 1800s, all in mint or near-mint condition. Derek's voice was hushed. This is worth, I don't even know. Tens of thousands at least. They moved to another shelf. More crates, these marked with different initials, JW, MB, PR. Each contained similar contents, family silver, coins, jewelry, documents carefully preserved in sealed containers. On the center of the room stood a workbench, and on that bench was a metal cylinder sealed with wax. Gordon lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of something substantial inside. We should bring everything up, Stuart called from above. Document it properly before we disturb too much. But Gordon was focused on the cylinder. He broke the wax seal carefully and removed the cap. Inside were papers, documents, letters, lists written in Samuel's precise handwriting. He began to read, and his expression changed. Derek, he said quietly, you need to see this. Derek took the papers, scanning quickly. His face went pale. Dad, these aren't Samuel's belongings. These are contracts. Legal agreements. Samuel was hired by these families to store their valuables. He was supposed to return everything after the Depression ended. Gordon took the papers back, reading more carefully now. The contracts were detailed, professional, specifying terms of storage, compensation, conditions for return. Samuel had been running a legitimate business, providing security for people who'd lost faith in banks. But Samuel had died in 1941, the location of this vault dying with him. These families never got their things back, Derek said. They thought Samuel had stolen from them, or that everything was lost. But it's been here all along. Gordon found a letter at the bottom of the cylinder, dated March 1941. Samuel's handwriting was shaky, suggesting illness or age. I have failed them, the letter began. I cannot return what I swore to protect. No family to trust, no one to pass this responsibility to. I can only hope that someday someone worthy will find what I have hidden and do what I could not, restore to these families what belongs to them. The weight of Samuel's words settled over both men. This wasn't treasure they'd found. It was a trust, a responsibility Samuel had carried alone and couldn't fulfill. And now, that responsibility was theirs. They spent the rest of the day carefully bringing everything up from the vault. Each item was photographed, documented, cross-referenced with Samuel's inventory lists. Stuart helped them organize everything in the barn, creating a makeshift archive that grew more substantial with each crate they opened. By evening, they had a full accounting. 7 families represented, each with detailed contracts and inventories. The total value was staggering, easily over $200,000, possibly more depending on the coin's rarity and condition. Gordon and Derek sat in the trailer. That night, Samuel's contracts spread across the small table between them. "Oh, we have to find these families," Gordon said. "Return what's theirs." "Agreed." Derek was already making notes. "But we need to do this properly. Hire a lawyer, document everything, make sure we're protected legally." Protected from what? From accusations we stole this. From families fighting over who gets what. From people coming out of nowhere, claiming connection to these names. Derek rubbed his eyes. "Dad, this is complicated. These contracts are 80 years old. Some of these families might not have descendants. Others might fight over ownership. Samuel trusted someone would do the right thing. And we will, but the right thing has to be done carefully, or we'll end up in court for years. Gordon knew his son was right, even if the caution felt like delay. They'd found something extraordinary, something that didn't belong to them, and every instinct said to start making things right, immediately. But Derek lived in a world of liability and documentation, and maybe that perspective was necessary now. The next morning, Derek called Douglas Whitmore, an estate attorney his firm had worked with. Whitmore agreed to drive out that afternoon, intrigued by Derek's vague description of a complicated inheritance situation. While they waited, Gordon and Derek continued cataloging. They worked easily together now, their earlier friction replaced by something closer to partnership. Derek's organizational skills complemented Gordon's careful attention to detail. They'd developed a rhythm over the past week, learning each other's strengths. "You're good at this," Gordon said, watching Derek photograph a particularly ornate serving platter. "At what?" "Being present. Being here, not somewhere else in your head." Derek set down the camera. "It's easier here. There's no one emailing me every 5 minutes, no meetings, no performance reviews. Just work that actually feels—" He paused, searching for the word. "Meaningful. Your career isn't meaningful. My career is profitable. That's not the same thing." Derek picked up the platter, examining the engraving along its rim. "I help companies optimize their operations so they can maximize shareholder value. It pays extremely well. But I couldn't tell you the last time I went home feeling like I'd actually done something that mattered." Gordon understood that feeling better than he could articulate. 37 years delivering mail. Important. Work, necessary work, but how many times had he felt it truly mattered? "Your mother used to say we spend so much time making a living that we forget to make a life," Gordon said quietly. She was right. They worked in comfortable silence until Whitmore arrived. The attorney was in his early 50s, fit and professional, with the careful manner of someone who'd learned to listen before speaking. Gordon and Derek walked him through everything: the initial discovery, the journal, the vault, the contracts. Whitmore examined documents with increasing amazement, occasionally stopping to take notes. "This is extraordinary," he said finally, "and legally complex in ways you probably haven't considered." "Such as?" Derek asked. "Statute of limitations, abandoned property law, rightful ownership after multiple generations, estate claims." Whitmore set down the contracts. "These families entered into legitimate agreements with Samuel Keller, but Keller died without fulfilling those agreements. The question is whether his estate, which is essentially you, Gordon, as the current property owner, has legal obligation to return these items, or whether they've become yours through abandonment and time." "We want to return them," Gordon said firmly. "Understood. But even with the best intentions, this process will take months, possibly years. We'll need to trace descendants, verify claims, handle disputes. Some families may have died out entirely. Those items would legally become yours. Others may fight over who's the rightful heir." "What about Samuel's compensation?" Derek asked. "The contracts specify he was entitled to 15% of value for storage and protection services." Whitmore reviewed the relevant documents. "That's actually helpful. It establishes that even if items are returned, you're entitled to fair compensation for your role in preserving and returning them. That should cover legal costs and provide some financial benefit for doing the right thing." The conversation continued for 2 hours, Whitmore methodically working through scenarios and legal requirements. By the end, they had a plan. Whitmore would handle the legal framework. They'd begin tracing families through genealogical research, and everything would be documented to protect all parties. "This is going to cost money," Whitmore warned. "Legal fees, research costs, possibly court filings if disputes arise." "How much?" Gordon asked. "Impossible to say precisely, but you're looking at several $1,000s minimum." Gordon felt his stomach tighten. That was money he didn't have. Derek spoke before Gordon could respond. "I'll cover it. Initial retainer and costs." "Derek, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Dad, you bought this farm. You found all this. The least I can do is help see it through properly." Derek turned to Whitmore. "Send me the paperwork. I'll have payment to you by Monday." After Whitmore left, Gordon tried again to thank Derek, but his son waved it off. "You gave me something more valuable than money," Derek said. "You gave me a reason to step away from work and remember what actually matters." That evening, they began the process of identifying descendants. Francine had provided them with genealogical resources, and Derek proved surprisingly adept at online research. They started with Randolph Hargrove, since his was the largest collection. The trail led through 3 generations: Randolph's son Charles, who died in 1985, Charles's daughter Margaret, who'd passed in 2003, and finally Margaret's daughter Paulette Hargrove Simmons, age 68, currently living 2 states away. Derek found an obituary for Margaret that mentioned the family's history. The Hargrove family, once prominent in Millersfield, lost much during the Great Depression, including treasured heirlooms that were never recovered. Margaret often spoke of her grandmother's silver service and her great-grandfather's pocket watch, family pieces she wished she could have passed to her own children. Gordon read the passage twice, feeling the weight of what they'd found. These weren't just valuable objects, they were family history, connections to ancestors, pieces of identity that had been missing for 80 years. "We have to contact her," Gordon said. "We will, but Whitmore said to go through proper channels first. We need to verify she's the legal heir, make sure there aren't competing claims." "Derek, I know, but we have to protect her too. If we just hand things over, and it turns out there's a family dispute, we could be making things worse." Gordon understood the logic, even if it frustrated him. They'd found something precious, something that belonged to someone else, and every day it sat in their barn felt wrong. But Derek's caution was probably wise. They worked late into the night, researching the other families. 2 more had clear living descendants. 3 were more complicated, lines that had ended or scattered so widely that tracing them would take considerable effort. Around midnight, Derek closed his laptop and stretched. "We should call it a night." "Just one more," Gordon said, still reading through an old newspaper article. Derek smiled. "You sound like me working on projects. Just one more email, just one more report. Is that what I sound like?" "Exactly like that." Derek stood, moved to the small window. "I've been thinking about something. When this is done, when we've returned everything we can and settled what we can't, what are you going to do with this place? Restore it. Live here, maybe. Make it something worth keeping. Would you want help? Long-term help, I mean." Gordon looked up from his reading. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying my lease is up in 3 months. I'm saying I could relocate, do consulting part-time, be closer to here. Help you build something real." Derek turned to face him. "If you want that." Gordon felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain, but emotion he hadn't expected. "I'd like that very much." "Okay then," Derek nodded, as if they'd just sealed a business deal rather than repaired years of distance. "We'll figure out the details later. But I wanted you to know, I'm not going anywhere after this is done." That night, lying in the narrow bed of his trailer, Gordon thought about Ruth, about how she'd always wanted him to be closer to Derek, to prioritize family over work. She would have loved seeing them like this, working together towards something meaningful. "We're getting there," he whispered into the darkness. "Slowly, but we're getting there." Outside, the barn stood silent in the moonlight, holding its 80-year-old secrets and the promise of connections restored. 2 weeks after discovering the vault, Whitmore called with news. He'd verified Paulette Hargrove Simmons as Randolph Hargrove's legitimate great-granddaughter and sole living descendant. The legal groundwork was in place to contact her directly. Gordon made the call that evening, his hands unsteady as he dialed. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice warm but cautious. "Hello? Mrs. Hargrove Simmons. My name is Gordon Ashfield. I'm calling about your great-grandfather, Randolph Hargrove." A pause. I don't understand. Is this about genealogy research? No, ma'am. It's about items that belong to your family, items that were lost during the Depression. The silence stretched so long, Gordon thought the connection had dropped. Then what items? Gordon explained carefully. The farm, the vault, Samuel Keller's contracts. He kept his voice steady, factual, not wanting to overwhelm her with implications before she understood the situation. When he finished, Paulette was crying quietly. My grandmother talked about those things her whole life, she said. The silver service they used every Thanksgiving. My great-great-grandfather's pocket watch. She blamed Grandpa Randolph for losing them, for trusting them to some blacksmith who disappeared. It caused a rift in the family that never healed. They're here, Gordon said gently. Safe, exactly as your great-grandfather left them. After 80 years? Samuel Keller kept his word. He just didn't live long enough to return them himself. They talked for nearly an hour. Paulette shared family stories Gordon carefully noted, details that would help verify items, context that made the silver and coins more than just valuable objects. By the call's end, they'd arranged for Paulette and her husband to visit the following Saturday. Gordon hung up feeling lighter than he had in months. Derek's vacation ended that week, but he'd arranged to work remotely on Fridays and spend long weekends at the farm. They used the remaining days preparing for Paulette's visit, cleaning items carefully, organizing everything for easy viewing. On Thursday afternoon, a man appeared at the farm driving an expensive sedan. He was perhaps 50, well-dressed, with the calculated friendliness of someone accustomed to negotiations. Gordon Ashfield. He extended his hand. Preston Cavanaugh. I'm an antiques dealer from the city. Gordon shook his hand warily. How did you hear about this? Small towns talk. Word gets around about interesting discoveries. Preston's eyes moved past Gordon toward the barn. I understand you found some Depression-era items. I have clients who collect such things. Very generous clients. The items aren't for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. I'm prepared to offer $150,000 cash for the entire collection. No questions, no complications, no waiting for lawyers to sort through decades-old contracts. Gordon felt Derek arrive behind him, silent but present. The items belonged to families who trusted Samuel Keller to protect them, Gordon said firmly. We're returning them to their rightful owners. Preston's smile never wavered. Noble but impractical. You'll spend years in legal battles, thousands in attorney fees, and for what? To hand valuable items to people who have no memory of them, no connection to ancestors they never knew. Meanwhile, you've invested in this property. You're on a fixed income. That money could transform your life. The answer is no. 175. Final offer. No. Preston's expression hardened slightly. You're making a mistake. These families will fight you. They'll question your motives, demand more than their fair share, tie you up in court until legal fees consume any compensation you might receive. I'm offering you a clean exit. Derek stepped forward. He said no. You should leave. Preston looked between them, calculating, then nodded slowly. Your choice. But when this becomes complicated, and it will, remember I gave you an easy way out. He handed Gordon a business card. Call me when you change your mind. After Preston drove away, Gordon crumpled the card and threw it in the trash. You handled that well, Derek said. I wasn't tempted. I was. For about 10 seconds. Derek smiled ruefully. That's a lot of money for doing essentially nothing, except betraying Samuel's trust and stealing from families who already lost enough. I know, but the fact that I even considered it, Derek shook his head, says something about who I've become. Says you're human. We all have moments of temptation. Saturday arrived clear and cool, autumn fully present now. Paulette and her husband George arrived mid-morning, both nervous and excited. Paulette was elegant at 68, silver hair and kind eyes, while George was quiet and supportive, letting his wife lead. Over tea in Gordon's trailer, they shared family stories. Paulette spoke of her grandmother Margaret, who died never knowing what happened to the family treasures. Of Randolph, who'd moved the family west in shame, believing he'd lost everything that mattered. He died in 1952, Paulette said. Never stopped talking about that pocket watch. It belonged to his father and his father before that. 3 generations of Hargrove men had carried it. Gordon led them to the barn, where everything was arranged carefully. Paulette gasped when she saw the silver service, recognizing pieces from her grandmother's descriptions. But when Gordon presented the pocket watch, silver, with the Hargrove family crest engraved on the cover, Paulette broke down completely. George held her as she composed herself, then she took the watch with trembling hands. She opened it carefully. Inside was an inscription, "To Randolph from your loving father, 1925. Grandmother described this watch hundreds of times, Paulette whispered. I thought she'd idealized it, that memory had made it more precious than it was. But it's exactly as she said. Even the inscription, she wound the watch gently. The mechanism engaged smoothly, ticking with the steady rhythm of quality craftsmanship. 80 years sealed underground, and it still worked. Derek handed Gordon a handkerchief, and Gordon realized he was crying too. Whitmore arrived with documentation, and they spent the afternoon reviewing everything. The Hargrove collection, silver coins, jewelry, documents, appraised at roughly $85,000. According to Samuel's contract, Gordon was entitled to 15%, just over $12,000. Paulette immediately wrote a check for the full amount. Gordon tried to refuse. Just seeing your face when you held that watch, that's payment enough. Samuel earned this, Paulette said firmly. And so have you. You could have sold everything quietly, kept all the money, and no one would have known. Instead, you're doing the hard, honest thing. That deserves to be rewarded. She insisted on something else too, covering legal costs for tracing the other families. Gordon accepted gratefully, humbled by her generosity. Before leaving, Paulette embraced both Gordon and Derek. You've given me more than family heirlooms. You've given me the truth about my great-grandfather. Randolph wasn't careless or foolish. He was scared and trying to protect what mattered. Now his memory can be what it should have been all along, a man who made hard choices during impossible times. After they left, Gordon and Derek stood in the barn, processing what had happened. Derek couldn't find words. I know. Seeing her face, her reaction, Derek shook his head. Preston offered us nearly twice what we'll get from all these families combined, and I don't feel even slightly regretful for turning him down. Gordon smiled. Good. Over the following weeks, they traced 2 more families. Both responses were similar to Paulette's: tears, gratitude, stories about ancestors and lost connections restored. Each family paid Samuel's contracted percentage, and each payment felt earned in ways Gordon's postal career never had. 3 families remained untraceable. Whitmore advised that after a year of documented searching, the unclaimed items would legally become Gordon's property. These included the most valuable pieces, a rare coin collection estimated at over $100,000. That's your retirement secured, Derek said, reviewing the appraisal. But Gordon was thinking about something else. I want to keep Samuel's personal things, his journals, his tools, some of the metalwork. Create a small museum here on the farm, tell his story properly. A museum. 1 room in the restored house. Show Samuel's craftsmanship, explain what he did, honor his integrity. He deserves to be remembered. Derek considered this, then nodded. I'll help you design it. The local newspaper ran a story. Hidden Vault reunites families after 80 years. Regional media picked it up, and soon Gordon and Derek found themselves minor celebrities. A documentary crew even contacted them about filming. They agreed, hoping the story might inspire others towards similar integrity. Preston Cavanaugh appeared one final time, angry at missing the opportunity. He threatened legal action, claiming finder's fees or some nebulous right to the discovery. Whitmore dismissed him easily. Preston had no standing whatsoever. Stewart warned them Preston was known for shady dealings, best ignored entirely. The documentary aired locally to positive response. Millersfield embraced Gordon and Derek as hometown heroes, though both men felt uncomfortable with the attention. What mattered more was what had happened between them. Derek had declined his promotion, arranged to consult part-time, and found a house 10 minutes from the farm. He'd be moving in by spring, For the first time in years, Gordon felt like he had a future worth anticipating. Winter arrived early, bringing the first snow in mid-November. Gordon and Derek spent weekends winterizing the barn and planning the farmhouse restoration. The museum room would be completed first, a priority project they both felt passionate about. Stuart helped them frame out the space, install proper climate control, and build custom display cases for Samuel's tools and journals. Derek designed the layout with surprising creativity, arranging everything to tell a coherent story. "You're good at this," Gordon observed, watching Derek position a display. "I minored in design before switching to business. Seemed impractical at the time." Derek adjusted the angle of Samuel's anvil. "Turns out impractical things are often the most satisfying." The museum would open in spring, coinciding with Millersfield's Heritage Festival. The town council had already requested Samuel's story be featured in the annual celebration, recognizing a piece of local history previously forgotten. Meanwhile, Whitmore continued searching for the 3 remaining families. One line had died out completely. No living descendants existed. Those items would legally become Gordon's after the required waiting period. The other 2 families proved maddeningly difficult to trace. Census records conflicted, name spellings varied, and branches had scattered across the country. Whitmore hired a professional genealogist, whose work Derek helped fund without complaint. In January, they finally located descendants of the second family, the Worthingtons. A granddaughter named Diane lived in Oregon, elderly herself now, but thrilled to learn about the discovery. She arranged to visit in March, when travel would be easier. The third family, the Bishops, remained elusive. Every lead ended in dead ends or conflicting information. After 3 months of searching, Whitmore suggested they might never find anyone with legitimate claim. "Give it until summer," Gordon said. "Then we'll know we tried everything possible." Derek agreed, though privately he told Gordon the Bishop collection, which included valuable jewelry and gold coins, would provide substantial financial security if unclaimed. On a Saturday in late February, Gordon received an unexpected call from Francine at the library. "I think I found something about the Bishop family," she said. "Can you come by?" Gordon and Derek drove to the library immediately. Francine led them to her office, where documents covered her desk. "The Bishop family has been difficult because the name changed," she explained. Martha Bishop, married in 1936, became Martha Bishop Kensington. Her daughter kept the hyphenated name, but her granddaughter dropped Bishop entirely. That's why searches only using Bishop found nothing. She showed them a family tree she'd painstakingly reconstructed. Martha's line continued through 3 generations, ending with a woman named Carolyn Kensington, age 43, living in the same state about 90 miles away. "I already contacted her," Francine said. "She's interested but skeptical. Apparently, her family has been targeted by scams before, people claiming to have lost relatives or hidden inheritances." "We have documentation," Derek said. "Contracts, inventories, everything legal. She wants to see proof before committing to anything." "I gave her your number," Carolyn called that evening. She was polite but guarded, clearly uncertain whether this was legitimate. Gordon patiently explained everything, offered to send photographs and copies of contracts, suggested she verify through Whitmore. "I'll think about it," Carolyn said. "This sounds too good to be true," which usually means it is. After she hung up, Derek sighed. "Can't blame her for being cautious." "No," Gordon agreed. "But I hope she gives us a chance to prove this is real." While they waited for Carolyn's decision, work on the museum room progressed. They'd refinished the floors, painted walls a warm cream color, and installed track lighting that highlighted displays without damaging delicate items. Samuel's story was told through carefully arranged exhibits: his arrival in Millersfield, his reputation as a craftsman, the Depression-era contracts, his mysterious disappearance. Photographs and journal excerpts provided intimate glimpses into his life. The centerpiece was Samuel's restored anvil, positioned on a custom stand with his most beautiful tools arranged nearby. A placard read, "Samuel Keller, Master Craftsman, Guardian of Trust, 1889–1941. Derek had written the text, and Gordon found it perfect. One evening, working late on final touches, Derek paused and looked around the completed room. "Do you think Samuel would approve?" he asked. "I think he'd be honored, and probably surprised anyone cared enough to remember him. That's the saddest part, isn't it? He died alone, thinking he'd failed, never knowing someone would eventually make this right." Gordon thought about that often, Samuel's final letter, his expression of failure, his hope that someday the right person would find what he'd hidden. Samuel had carried that burden alone, with no family to share it, no one to trust with the truth. "We can't change what happened to him," Gordon said, "but we can make sure he's remembered properly, that his integrity means something." They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that had become natural between them. The distance that had defined their relationship for decades had dissolved gradually, replaced by something stronger. Genuine partnership, mutual respect, affection they no longer struggled to express. In early March, Carolyn finally agreed to visit. She arrived with her husband and a lawyer, prepared to verify everything before believing it. Gordon respected her caution, even as it created additional work. They spent hours reviewing documentation, examining items, discussing Samuel's contracts and the legal framework Whitmore had established. Carolyn's lawyer asked pointed questions, verified authenticity, ensured his client's interests were protected. By day's end, Carolyn was convinced. The Bishop collection included items she recognized from family stories: her great-great-grandmother's emerald necklace, gold coins that had financed the family business before the Depression, documents recording Bishop family history. "My grandmother told me stories," Carolyn said, holding the emerald necklace carefully, "about her mother Martha, who lived through the Depression and lost everything the family had built. Martha always said the losses weren't just financial. They were pieces of family identity, connections to ancestors who'd built something meaningful." The Bishop collection appraised at $93,000. Gordon's percentage, just under $14,000. Combined with previous payments and the unclaimed Worthington items, Gordon now had enough to fully restore the farm and secure his retirement. But more importantly, they'd done what Samuel couldn't, returned what belonged to families who'd trusted him. Diane Worthington visited in late March, elderly but spry, delighted to hold items her grandfather had hidden 85 years earlier. Her collection was smaller, mostly documents, and a modest silver set, but her gratitude was immense. With all traceable families contacted and reunions complete, only the final unclaimed collection remained: coins, tools, and miscellaneous items worth approximately $70,000 that would legally become Gordon's after the required waiting period ended in July. The museum opened on May 15th. During Millersfield's Heritage Festival, over 200 people attended, far more than Gordon had anticipated. The mayor gave a speech about integrity and community history. Paulette Hargrove Simmons cut the ribbon officially, her great-grandfather's pocket watch displayed prominently in the first exhibit. Gordon gave brief remarks, thanking Samuel for the unexpected gift. "He taught me that true wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you give back. And he gave me back my son." Derek stood beside him, no longer the distant, perpetually distracted man who'd arrived at the farm 9 months earlier. He'd relocated permanently, his consulting practice thriving despite reduced hours, his life finally balanced in ways his marriage never achieved. After the ceremony, they walked the property together, surveying all they'd accomplished. The barn stood restored, the farmhouse livable, the museum a testament to one man's integrity preserved across decades. "No regrets?" Derek asked. Gordon looked at his son, at the farm they'd rebuilt together, at the community celebrating a story of honesty in an often cynical world. "None," he said. "Not a single one." They had one more task ahead, the final auction of unclaimed items in July. But that felt less like an ending now, and more like the conclusion of one chapter before another began. The farm wasn't just restored. It was alive again, with purpose and meaning neither man had anticipated when Gordon first drove past that for sale sign. Sometimes the greatest treasures really are the ones that bring you home. July arrived with summer heat that shimmered over the restored farm. The waiting period had ended, and the unclaimed items legally belonged to Gordon now. Whitmore had arranged for a reputable auction house to handle the sale, ensuring fair market value and proper documentation. The auction was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the farm itself. The auction house believed the venue would attract both serious collectors and curious locals, potentially driving prices higher than a standard city auction. Derek had moved into his new house in May, close enough to walk to Gordon's farm on pleasant evenings. They'd fallen into an easy routine. Coffee together most mornings, collaborative work on various projects, dinners several times a week. The relationship they'd both wanted but never knew how to build had finally materialized. On the Thursday before the auction, a package arrived for Gordon. Overnight delivery, no return address, just a Denver postmark. Inside was a letter and several photographs. "Dear Mr. Ashfield," the letter began in neat handwriting. "My name is Virginia Whitmore. I'm writing about my grandfather, Samuel Keller." Gordon's hands trembled as he read. Virginia explained that she'd only recently learned Samuel was her grandfather. Her mother had been born in 1940 to Samuel and a woman named Helen, who'd never married Samuel officially. Helen had moved to Colorado when Samuel died, changed her name, and never spoke of him. Virginia only discovered the truth when sorting through her mother's effects after she passed away 6 months ago. "I found letters between my grandfather and grandmother," Virginia wrote. "They loved each other deeply, but circumstances kept them apart. Samuel sent money regularly, wrote beautiful letters to my mother, but believed he couldn't marry Helen because of his work. Something about trust and responsibility he couldn't explain." The photographs showed Samuel in his later years, smiling in ways the earlier pictures hadn't captured. One showed him holding a baby, Virginia's mother. Another showed him and Helen together, their affection evident despite the formal pose. "I saw the news coverage about the vault and the museum," the letter continued. "I'm so grateful someone honored his memory properly. I wish I'd known him. From what I've learned, he was a man of extraordinary integrity who carried burdens alone because he believed that was his duty." Virginia wasn't asking for anything. She simply wanted Gordon to know Samuel hadn't died as alone as everyone believed. He'd had love, had fathered a child, had reasons beyond work to do what he did. He was protecting not just other people's treasures, she wrote, but also his ability to provide for my grandmother and mother. The money he earned from those contracts supported them for years. In his way, he was a good father and partner, even if circumstances prevented him from claiming those roles publicly. Gordon showed the letter to Derek that evening. "Samuel had a family," Derek said quietly. "All this time we thought he died alone, but he had people who mattered to him. And he never told anyone about the vault, because doing so might have jeopardized his ability to protect them." They sat with that knowledge, understanding Samuel's story in a new light. He hadn't just been a craftsman fulfilling contracts. He'd been a father and partner, using his unique skills to provide for people he loved while honoring commitments to others. Gordon called Virginia that evening. They spoke for over an hour, Virginia sharing stories her mother had told about Samuel, his gentleness, his perfectionism, his quiet humor. Gordon shared what they'd discovered, the families they'd reunited, the museum honoring Samuel's legacy. "Would you come to the auction?" Gordon asked. "I'd like you to choose some of Samuel's personal items before anything is sold. You're his granddaughter. You have more right to his things than anyone." Virginia's voice caught. "I couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition, it's right. Please come." She agreed, promising to drive up Friday evening. Virginia arrived as promised, a woman in her early 50s with Samuel's serious eyes and careful manner. Gordon and Derek showed her the museum first, and she wept quietly as she read her grandfather's journal entries and examined his craftsmanship. "He would have loved this," she said. knowing his work mattered, that his integrity was remembered. They spent Friday evening going through Samuel's personal items, tools he'd made himself, journals, the few photographs they'd found. Virginia selected several pieces. Samuel's favorite hammer, inscribed with his initials, a leather-bound journal. From 1940, the last year of his life, a small metal rose he'd forged, which letters suggested he'd made for Helen. "These are my family history," she said. "Thank you for understanding that." Saturday morning arrived clear and warm. The auction house had set up on the restored barn's main floor, chairs arranged for attendees, items displayed professionally. By 9 o'clock, over 60 people had gathered. Collectors, dealers, curious townspeople, even a few journalists covering the story's conclusion. The auctioneer, a professional named Richard Sterling, explained the provenance of each item before bidding began. Samuel's story added value beyond the objects themselves. These weren't just antiques, but pieces of authenticated history with documented integrity behind them. The first items were tools from the unclaimed Carlisle collection. Bidding was competitive, prices exceeding estimates. A set of Depression-era handplanes sold for $1,800. Antique woodworking tools brought $2,200. Then came the coins. The coin collection included rare pieces, gold eagles from the 1920s, silver dollars in pristine condition, even a few coins dating to the 1800s that had somehow survived in mint state. The auction house had estimated the collection at $40,000 to $50,000 total. Bidding opened at $20,000. Within minutes, it reached $45,000. Two serious collectors competed, each determined to acquire the complete set. The price climbed, $50,000, $55,000, $60,000. Gordon watched astonished as the bidding continued. Beside him, Derek squeezed his shoulder. At $73,000, one collector finally withdrew. The coins sold to a museum representative, who explained they'd be preserved as an educational collection, teaching future generations about Depression-era economics and the people who survived those years. "Samuel would approve of that," Virginia whispered to Gordon. Additional items sold steadily: decorative metalwork, vintage tools, documents of historical interest. Each brought prices above estimates, driven partially by quality but also by the story surrounding them. By noon, when Sterling called a break, total sales exceeded $90,000. After auction house fees and expenses, Gordon would net approximately $75,000. Combined with payments from the returned collections, Gordon had accumulated over $100,000, more money than he'd ever possessed at once in his entire life. During the break, Preston Kavanagh appeared. He'd been bidding on several items unsuccessfully, clearly frustrated at being outbid repeatedly. "You could have had nearly twice this much if you'd accepted my offer," he said to Gordon. "No delays, no complications, no fees." Gordon smiled. "But I wouldn't have met Virginia, wouldn't have learned Samuel's full story, wouldn't have known that doing the right thing matters to people beyond just me." Preston shook his head. "Sentimental nonsense." "Maybe," Gordon agreed. "But it's my sentimental nonsense and I'm content with it." Preston walked away, and Derek laughed quietly. "I think you just won that exchange." The afternoon session sold remaining items, concluding around 3 o'clock. Sterling presented Gordon, with preliminary paperwork, final settlement to follow within 10 business days. Stewart approached as the crowd dispersed. "Well, Gordon, you did it. Bought a wreck of a farm, found a treasure, reunited families, honored a dead man's integrity, and made yourself financially secure. Not bad for a year's work." Gordon looked. Round at the restored barn, the museum visible through open doors, Derek chatting with Virginia about family history they now shared through Samuel's story. "Best investment I ever made," Gordon said truthfully. That evening, the three of them, Gordon, Derek, and Virginia, sat on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "What will you do now?" Virginia asked Gordon. "Keep building, keep restoring, keep living." Gordon glanced at Derek. Maybe teach my son some of the things I should have taught him years ago. Derek smiled. I'm a willing student now. Better late than never. The week following the auction brought unexpected attention. A national news outlet picked up the story, framing it as integrity across generations, how one man's honor lasted 80 years. The segment aired on Tuesday evening, featuring interviews Gordon and Derek had given weeks earlier. By Wednesday morning, Gordon's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some calls were genuine, people moved by the story, sharing their own family histories of loss during the Depression. Others were less welcome, distant relatives of the families they'd already contacted, suddenly claiming they deserved additional compensation. Whitmore fielded most of these, politely but firmly explaining that all legal obligations had been satisfied. One call stood out. A man named Howard Brennan introduced himself as a historian specializing in Depression-era craftsmanship. He'd seen the news coverage and wanted to study Samuel's work for a book he was writing about artisan culture during economic crisis. Samuel Keller represents something we've lost, Howard explained when he visited Friday. Craftsmen who valued integrity over profit, who understood that reputation meant more than immediate gain. I'd like permission to document his story properly, academically, so it becomes part of the historical record. Gordon agreed immediately. Samuel deserved that recognition. Howard spent the weekend photographing items in the museum, reviewing journals, interviewing Gordon and Virginia about what they'd learned. His enthusiasm was infectious, his respect for Samuel's work evident in every question he asked. "This will be a chapter in my book," Howard said Sunday evening, "but I think Samuel's story deserves its own volume. Would you consider collaborating? Your perspective as the person who discovered and honored his legacy is essential to understanding the complete narrative." Gordon looked at Derek, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored," Gordon said. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. Derek continued his consulting work, but spent increasing time at the farm, helping Gordon plan the next phase of restoration. They decided to convert the old farmhouse's second floor into a proper residence for Gordon, keeping the main floor as museum space. Virginia visited monthly, building a relationship with Gordon and Derek that felt natural despite its recent origin. She brought more family photographs, letters Helen had saved, pieces of Samuel's story that enriched the museum's narrative. In August, the final legal settlements concluded. All families had been paid, all documentation filed, all obligations satisfied. Whitmore presented Gordon with a leather portfolio containing complete records of everything, proof that Samuel Keller's trust had finally been honored. "You did something remarkable," Whitmore said, shaking Gordon's hand. "In 30 years of practicing law, I've never seen anyone prioritize integrity over profit so consistently. Samuel chose well when this farm ended up in your hands." That evening, Gordon and Derek sat in the barn where everything had started. The space had been transformed, structural repairs complete, old forge area restored to show how Samuel had worked, displays telling stories of craftsmanship and honor across generations. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd taken Preston's offer?" Derek asked. "Sometimes," Gordon admitted. "In abstract terms, that would have been more money for less effort. But I wouldn't have this. Wouldn't have reconnected with you properly. Wouldn't have met Virginia or the families or learned Samuel's story. Wouldn't have discovered that doing difficult things for right reasons brings satisfaction money can't provide." Derek nodded slowly. "My marriage ended because neither of us knew how to prioritize what mattered. I spent years chasing success, thinking achievement was the same as fulfillment. It took an abandoned farm and an 80-year-old mystery to teach me the difference." "You've changed," Gordon observed. "So have you. You're less," Derek searched for the word, "less resigned. When I first came here, you seemed like someone just going through motions, waiting for life to be over. Now you're actually living." Gordon recognized the truth in that. Buying the farm had been partly about having something to do, but mostly about avoiding the emptiness Ruth's death had left. He'd expected a project to fill time, nothing more. Instead, he'd found purpose, connection, meaning he'd spent decades overlooking while focused on routine and responsibility. "Your mother would be pleased," Gordon said quietly. "Seeing us like this, actually talking, working together, she always wanted that. I wish she could have seen it. Maybe she can." Gordon wasn't particularly religious, but the sentiment felt true regardless. "Maybe she's why you kept coming back those first weeks, even when you were frustrated with me." Derek smiled. "Maybe, or maybe I was finally ready to stop running from things that scared me." "Like what?" "Like admitting my life wasn't working. Like acknowledging I'd inherited your worst habits along with your better qualities. Like accepting that success and happiness aren't synonyms." Derek stood, walked to the museum display of Samuel's journals. "Samuel understood something it took me 45 years to learn. Real wealth is measured in relationships, integrity, work that means something beyond paychecks." They locked up the barn and walked to Gordon's trailer in comfortable silence. The farmhouse renovation would be finished by October, and Gordon would finally move into a proper home. Derek had already claimed the guest room, joking that he needed somewhere to stay when helping with projects. Both knew it was more than that. After decades of distance, they discovered they actually enjoyed each other's company. The next morning, Stuart arrived with lumber for the farmhouse renovation. The three men worked through the day, their easy camaraderie a stark contrast to those first tense Saturdays 9 months earlier. "You two have come a long way," Stuart observed during lunch. "First time Derek showed up, I thought you'd end up never speaking again." "Too much anger, too much history. What changed your mind?" Derek asked. "Watching you both choose to keep showing up. Anger's easy. You can maintain that from a distance. Actually building something together? That requires commitment neither of you could fake." Stuart bit into his sandwich. "Plus, you both stopped trying to prove who was right and started trying to understand each other. That made all the difference." Gordon thought about that as they returned to work. Stuart was right. Those first weeks had been about proving points, defending positions, protecting pride. Only when they'd stopped competing and started collaborating had real progress become possible. By evening, they'd framed out the new stairway to Gordon's second-floor apartment. The work was satisfying in ways Gordon's postal career had never been. Tangible, creative, building something that would last. That night, sitting on the farmhouse porch with Derek, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Gordon felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Contentment, not happiness exactly. Not the joy he'd known with Ruth, but something deeper. A sense that his life had meaning, that his days mattered, that he was finally where he belonged. "Thank you," he said to Derek. "For what?" "For coming back. For staying. For giving us a second chance." Derek reached over, squeezed his father's shoulder. "Thank you for buying an abandoned farm and refusing to give up on mysteries or people, including me." They sat in comfortable silence, two men who'd found their way back to each other through patience, perseverance, and an 80-year-old blacksmith's legacy of integrity. The treasure they'd found wasn't in the vault. It was here, in this quiet moment, in this rebuilt relationship, in this life they were constructing together. 6 months later, spring returned to the farm with the soft insistence of new beginnings. The farmhouse stood fully restored, its fresh paint gleaming white in morning sunlight, flower beds Gordon had planted showing their first green shoots. The museum had become a regular stop for school groups and tourists, with Francine coordinating educational visits that taught local history through Samuel's story. Virginia visited monthly, always bringing some small artifact or story that enriched their understanding of the grandfather she'd never known. Gordon had moved into the second-floor apartment in November, finally leaving the cramped trailer behind. The space was modest but comfortable, with windows overlooking the property he'd transformed from abandonment into purpose. Derek's house, 10 minutes away, had become a second home for both of them. They alternated dinners, shared weekend projects, fell into the kind of easy companionship Gordon had once believed impossible between them. On a Saturday in early April, they stood together in the barn, installing the final piece of the museum, Samuel's restored anvil, positioned on a custom walnut stand Derek had designed and built himself. "It's beautiful work," Gordon said, running his hand over the smooth wood. Samuel would approve of the joinery, Derek replied, adjusting the anvil's position slightly. I used techniques from his era. Seemed appropriate. They stepped back to survey the completed display. The anvil dominated the room's center, surrounded by Samuel's tools, journals, and the story they'd pieced together from fragments and faith. A placard Derek had written read, Samuel Keller, Master Craftsman, 1889–1941. His legacy reminds us that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in the trust we honor and the integrity we maintain, even when no one is watching. Perfect, Gordon said quietly. Stuart arrived mid-morning with supplies for their next project, converting the old chicken coop into a proper workshop. At 73, Gordon had discovered he enjoyed working with wood, creating small items he sold at the local craft market. Nothing elaborate, just honest craftsmanship that connected him to Samuel's philosophy. They worked through the afternoon, the three men moving with practiced coordination. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and occasional laughter. Derek's phone rang once, a client with questions. He answered briefly, professionally, then put it away and returned to work without the anxious distraction that had once defined him. Not taking the call? Stuart teased. They can wait. This is more important. Gordon caught his son's eye and smiled. A year ago, Derek would have spent 30 minutes on that call, apologizing profusely to them while prioritizing work. Now he'd learned to set boundaries, to protect the life he was building, rather than letting career consume everything else. Over lunch, Stuart shared news that Preston Kavanagh had been arrested for dealing in stolen antiques. Always suspected he operated on the wrong side of legal, Stuart said. You were smart to refuse him. We were lucky, Gordon corrected. Lucky Samuel's story taught us what mattered. That evening, after Stuart left, Gordon and Derek walked the property together. It had become a ritual, surveying what they'd accomplished, planning future projects, simply being present in the space they'd reclaimed together. I've been thinking about something, Derek said as they reached the barn. My consulting contract ends in August. I could renew it, but I'm considering something different. What's that? Full retirement, I'm 46, I have savings, and I'd rather spend time doing work that matters than maximizing income I don't really need. Derek leaned against the barn door. I was thinking about learning traditional blacksmithing, maybe offering workshops here, teaching Samuel's techniques, keeping that knowledge alive. Gordon felt warmth spread through his chest. He'd like that. You carrying forward what he started. You think I could learn it? I'm not exactly young. Samuel didn't start until his 20s. You've got time, Gordon smiled. Besides, I could use the company. Being the only one working on projects gets lonely. They stood watching the sunset, paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The same view Samuel must have seen countless evenings while working at his forge. Do you ever regret it? Derek asked. Choosing the hard way, we could be $75,000 richer if we'd taken Preston's offer. And we'd have missed everything that mattered. The family's gratitude, Virginia's connection, your career change, this, Gordon gestured at the farm. All of this came from choosing integrity over ease. I don't regret it for a moment. Neither do I, Derek said quietly. Best decision I never knew I needed to make. The following week brought unexpected news. Howard Brennan's book chapter about Samuel had attracted attention from a major publisher. They wanted to expand it into a full book, with Gordon and Virginia contributing their perspectives. It's going to be called The Blacksmith's Trust, Howard explained during a conference call. Samuel's story as the framework, but really exploring how integrity functions across generations, how one person's choices echo through time. Gordon agreed to participate, honored that Samuel's legacy would reach beyond their small museum. That Saturday, Virginia arrived with her daughter Michelle, Gordon's first time meeting Samuel's great-granddaughter. Michelle was in her 20s, studying art history, fascinated by the craftsmanship Samuel had practiced. I'm considering, A thesis on Depression-era artisans, Michelle explained, examining Samuel's metalwork. How economic crisis paradoxically produced some of the finest craftsmanship because people had time and needed quality that would last. Gordon spent the afternoon showing her Samuel's techniques, explaining what they'd learned about his methods. Derek joined them, and Gordon realized they'd become an informal family, connected not by blood, but by shared commitment to honoring one man's integrity. As evening approached and Virginia prepared to leave, she hugged Gordon tightly. "You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost," she said. "A grandfather to be proud of, a history worth claiming, proof that goodness matters even when it's difficult." After they left, Gordon stood alone in the museum, surrounded by Samuel's story. He thought about the journey, from lonely widower, buying an abandoned farm, to someone with purpose, family, meaningful work. The treasure hadn't been the coins or silver, though those had helped. The real treasure was rediscovering that life could surprise you, that it's never too late to build something meaningful, that integrity creates wealth no auction can measure. Derek appeared in the doorway. "Ready for dinner? I'm making Ruth's lasagna recipe." Gordon smiled at the mention of his wife's name, no longer painful but warm with memory. "She'd be happy, you know, seeing us like this." "I know. I think about that a lot." They walked to Derek's house together, talking about small things, the weather, weekend plans, a project they'd start Monday. Ordinary conversation between father and son, made extraordinary by the years they'd lost and the grace they'd been given to find each other again. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden beneath floorboards, waiting decades to be discovered, and sometimes they're simply waiting for us to stop long enough to notice what's been there all along.